day 6 of the Diddy trial, and Cassie Ventura took the stand and testified for nearly a full day about her relationship with Diddy. And I believe that the testimony was more intense, more sensational, and I think more disturbing than I or just about anybody realized it was going to be. Derek, if you can for us, give us the highlights of Cassie's testimony. How did this go down? She was on the stand for better part of 5 or 6 hours today. What exactly happened?
Yeah, this really was a full day of testimony. It's the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Cassie came to the stand. She is, of course, pregnant, and she was ready to testify about the full course of her relationship with Diddy. And remember, they were together for 10 years. This was a decade-long relationship, and that will come into play when the defense has an opportunity to cross-examine her and ask her about the terms of that relationship.
The whole idea of consent, yeah.
But this was her laying out the narrative in the prosecution's case in chief, and she squarely addresses that beating video in the Intercontinental Hotel in 2016. But even before then, they go back in time and said, when did these freak-offs really start? And she really painted a picture of the very first freak-off, where she says she was 22 years old. This occurred at one of Diddy's homes. She said it was highly directed. There was masquerade masks involved. There were escorts involved. There were at least 2 sessions in that first freak-off, and the session was over when the escort, who had been paid for the services, was done, had sort of performed the services that they were paid for. She says that she felt as though she couldn't say no to these freak-offs. She had dated Diddy for enough time at that point that saying no didn't seem like an option to her because he would get very angry. She was worried about sort of him blackmailing her potentially.
This is everything. Could she have left? And I think at some level the answer is yes. She could have gone to police. She was not physically restrained. She went out. She performed jobs. She traveled all around the world without him.
They dated. They were on red carpets together. They were in a relationship.
At any point, she could have physically left, gone to the police, gone to friends, gone to family, said, I want out. Apparently, none of that happened. Obviously, the defense is going to make a big deal about that. But
she would say psychologically, I felt trapped.
But and it's not
by that relationship.
It's not just, and there's a point to that, right?
There's a big point to it.
She testified to routine physical abuse, both during the freak-offs and outside of the freak-offs. Certainly emotional abuse, and also her career prospects largely tied to him.
Yes.
And she also, just for what it's worth, knew him to be a violent person outside of her relationship with him. And I'm sure there was some element of fear there. But nevertheless, I think it's worth noting, because defense is sure is not going to make a big deal of it probably tomorrow, that at any point she could have gone to police, she could have gone to family, she could have gotten protection, and she didn't.
Remember, the first witness who came on yesterday, though, said that there was physical violence towards her, that he bore witness in hearing slapping during one occasion, said he could no longer perform sexually because it was so upsetting to him to see Diddy be violent with Cassie. So they have set up that some of this coercion, which might have been mental and in her subjective state of mind, she felt trapped. Some of it may have also been physical. We're really getting down to the brass tacks about what is coercion. You know, coercion is forcing someone against their will to do something, but it doesn't necessarily take place at gunpoint or knife point. These aren't Central Park rapes. This was in the context of a 10-year relationship. So it is hard to wrap your mind around, well, how could you be coerced into doing things you don't want for a 10-year span? So to establish that, they're going to really paint very vivid pictures of what the sexual terms of this relationship were. Were there promises and threats? She mentioned feeling like there could be blackmail. Was there monitoring and control? That's another form of potential coercion. And Diddy orchestrated these things, according to the prosecutors, and kept very tight tabs on how she did her nails. She testified that they had to look a certain way. Was there violence and intimidation? According to the first witness, there was some violence. And obviously, when you watch that beating video, that is certainly violent.
Well, let's leave that for a second, just because I think everything comes to a head with that video.
Yes.
There's so much before that, as you were mentioning, the nails. He directed, according to Cassie's testimony, directed every single element of the freak-offs.
Yeah.
How she looked, how her appearance was. He said it, according to her, he said, you look too Hispanic. I want you to change your hair. Every minute detail, where the man was to be, when he was going to have sex with her, what, pre-sexual acts they were going to engage in together. She had to literally drop into a bathtub full of baby oil because he liked seeing her slick during the sexual performances.
And you can do all of these things consensually. You really can.
Right. Which is why the issue of coercion is so important, fundamental to the case.
It really is. I think part of the prosecution's description and eliciting testimony from her about how far from the norm some of these sexual acts were, in particular the urination episode. She really testified about sexual acts that involved being urinated on by multiple men, including Diddy.
Was it just men? I couldn't quite figure that out from the testimony.
I think it was just men.
Is that what okay.
That's how I interpreted it.
Certainly what his preference was to watch men have sex with her. I couldn't tell if there were women involved in it. Not that it really matters.
Yeah,
it certainly doesn't matter legally, but I just was curious about it.
Sure, unclear. Yeah. And part of her testimony was, she said she was urinated on by two men at some point, one of them being Diddy. And when pressed, she said, I thought, did you want this? And she said, I thought it was obvious. Her word was obvious that I wouldn't want this.
Right.
So that is sort of getting into the realm of convincing those jurors sitting there, could anyone possibly want to be urinated on? She said at some point there was so much urine in her mouth she began to choke. Could anyone, can the jurors believe that anyone would want this done? There are certain sexual acts and call them perversions or whatever, that are hard for people, ordinary people on that jury, to believe anyone could consent to.
And remember, the standard here is not, could it theoretically be that she wanted all these things? That is certainly one way to look at it. But you're dealing with individual jurors who bring their own personal histories to every case, and they're going to be asked, do you think that a reasonable person would consent to this? Some people are going to say, yes, I think a reasonable person could. Some people,
and maybe in New York, you might get some of those jurors. These are not prudes. This is New York City. You're going to get some people who are worldly, cosmopolitan, and have active sexual lives of their own.
As I was reading through the testimony today, I wrote down sort of 8 things that I think that the defense is going to try to get out of her on the stand tomorrow, and also certainly will argue in closing arguments. The umbrella is the whole thing was consensual, that she could have left at any time. She could have terminated the relationship at any time. Though it sometimes made her feel uncomfortable, she never outright refused to engage in the sex acts. In fact, she would sometimes assist in the selection of the sex workers. She would sometimes be the person who actually handed over money to the sex workers without Diddy's present. He would often not even be there. She would have to FaceTime in with him, or he would elect to FaceTime in to watch from afar. She never told a family or a friend or family member that she wanted to stop. She never went to police. Is it deviant? Yes. Is it shocking? Yes. But ultimately, the defense is going to argue it was always, at the end of the day, consensual.
I think you're right. In the defense, he's got very good lawyers. They're going to be able to score these points in their cross-examination of her, and they're going to be able to sort of puncture some of the narrative. They have to be very, very careful. We've talked about this before. She's a very sympathetic witness. Pregnant people are going to engender sympathy. As a matter of fact, Mark Agnifilo told the judge before, the attorney for Diddy said, look, pregnancy is a wonderful thing. It's also a way that people engender sympathy. Now, he didn't say this in front of her, but he was informing the judge that this could be prejudicial to my client, just the way she looks.
What's the judge going to do about it? Hold the trial because she happens to be pregnant?
Can't do anything about it. It is just the nature of the beast.
But all of those defenses, in some way, I think, crumble in the face of the Cassie videotape. And we've been wondering forever how the prosecution was going to use the videotape from the Intercontinental Hotel, that horrific beating video, and why it was so important to their case beyond just the atmospherics. It makes him look like a monster. We get that. But was there relevant, pertinent testimony that was going to be impacted by that? And I think this is exactly where it comes. The idea of consent, I just laid it out how the defense is going to argue it. It does melt away when you see that video because of her testimony. Her testimony is that that day she was in a freak off. She was in the hotel room with Diddy and a male sex worker, and she endured all of the conduct that we've previously described. She said that there was a session 2 scheduled after session 1, and a session 2. There's going to be a break.
And she wanted no part of it.
During the break, she said, I'm leaving. I do not want to be here anymore. I want to leave. And this is to my knowledge of her testimony, the first time she ever testified that she said, I don't want to be here anymore. She gathered up her things and she left, and he chased her down in the hallway, kicked the shit out of her, and then dragged her, kicking and screaming, literally kicking and screaming, back down the hallway by her hair into the room.
We no
longer have any argument of consent. If the jury believes her, which is, credibility is always an issue here. If the jury believes her, all the arguments that she didn't consent fly out the window.
That's right. That is forceful, violent. You will no longer have to play this dance out of whether or not she was in on the freak offs. If she was trying to escape and he forcefully drags her back into a room, that's a rough day for Diddy. Now, Diddy, I think, will try to establish that something else happened entirely, that it had to do with him seeing something on a cell phone.
They had a mutually violent relationship.
A violent relationship.
Part of the course of their conduct, that they would often have these kind of like almost consensual, non-consensual kind of actions together then.
He needs to do that.
Yes.
I mean, frankly, that is the death knell for Diddy. If she is credible on this point about wanting to leave that freak off, expressing verbally that she wanted to leave, trying to leave down the hallway and being dragged back in, that's really game, set, match. I do also want to point out some of the testimony she said about after the freak offs. There's circumstantial evidence that these things weren't entirely sort of consensual acts. She described that there was baby oil all over the walls, and she said there would sometimes be blood on the linens. Because of the violent nature of these sex acts and the beatings.
Hold on. And one other thing, she also said that he liked it when she was on her period.
I didn't.
You didn't read that part?
I didn't remember that part of the testimony.
I got this from the New York Times.
Well, then that's not going to be as helpful.
They tested. Well, no, there was some of that, but also he would schedule these things often during her period because
he had a fascination.
Whatever.
Sure. And that's not to yuck anyone's yum.
That is just was the testimony. There was. I was going to make a point. I lost it. Anyway.
Right. But some of that blood could have been from the violence that she claims to have endured. And then if you have some hotel workers who come in and testify as to the state of the room after Diddy would leave the hotel, not knowing, not being there present during the freak offs, but just seeing the state of the room, the broken vases in the Intercontinental Hotel, some of that will start to look like an ordinary jury member that wasn't just sex going on in there, that was something more, and maybe some participant in it didn't want to be there.
One other point that I really want to make here, I think it's important, is she started to lay the foundation, the groundwork for the prosecution's case that he was the mastermind of a criminal enterprise, which I know is going to be the hardest thing for prosecutors to prove. She started to lay that by listing the employees that knew about the endeavors and that engaged and helped in these freak offs. Remember, the freak offs are a couple of things. Number one, you have the sex act, you have the coercion of Cassie into the sex act. And also you have the paying prostitutes to go across state lines, it's essential for a federal case, across state lines to engage in these freak offs with Cassie.
That's right.
With he and Cassie. By listing the employees, here's the criminal enterprise.
Yes. Now we have others involved.
Employees, friends. He was sending out people in order to do his bidding for him. There were FaceTimes being set up not by Cassie, but with other people in his employ. So there's a criminal act, which is the bringing people across state lines for coercive sex.
That he's coordinating.
That he is coordinating with a number of other people. Though if the prosecution can prove it, and they've got a long way to go to prove it, right? This is one witness, and there's a lot of hearsay, it seems, that might be involved here. They've got to prove it. But if they can prove it, here's your criminal enterprise. Here's the mastermind. Here's the RICO case.
That's exactly right. Everyone has been asking, is this just a customer of a prostitution company where he ordered some things? That's not a criminal enterprise. But all of a sudden, if you have employees, they have what's called a hub and spoke. In conspiracy and RICO cases, you'll hear this term, which means someone is the center and they are directing the spokes, like the spokes of a wheel. And there's your criminal enterprise. If they can establish Diddy, who in opening statements they said preferred to be called king, you now have your leader directing orders to underlings. There's your enterprise. And that's what the prosecution, as you said, this is day one of Cassie's testimony. She's not going to be their only witness on this point, but they need to start laying that foundation if they're going to uphold a conspiracy RICO type offense.
Yeah, just one last point. In addition to being like to be called the king, he was also the one, according to Cassie, who was actually bankrolling the whole thing.
Right.
She would sometimes hand the money over, but it was his money. So again, you're just establishing that he is the centerpiece of this criminal enterprise. These others are unindicted co-conspirators. Just because they're not also facing charges doesn't mean they weren't part of this larger conspiracy, this larger enterprise. But he has to be the fulcrum of it in order for them to really prove their case, and that's what they're trying to do here.
Yep.
Obviously, huge day for Diddy. For Cassie, for the prosecution. She won the day, but that's what's going to happen every day during the prosecution's case in chief. When you turn to the defense's case or cross-examination of Cassie, you're going to have the tide switch back. As good a day as it was for the prosecution, I think by any measure it was a good day.
The ebb and flow of this case is just beginning.
Exactly.
And it will seem as though he is winning tomorrow. It just goes back and forth. The jury is going to be swimming in this for a while.
Right. All right, I'm going to go to a few questions. One of them, Jay Sans, says, is bribery to cover up a crime legal in America? So a bunch of people have asked this and similar questions. I want to hit on this. We talked about it, I believe, yesterday because there was evidence that Diddy had tried to pay off the hotel staff or the security guard in order to not go public, to quiet down this videotape, to somehow not talk about what he had seen. Bribery, by definition, has to involve a law enforcement official or a public official, a policeman or a politician, basically. You are permitted under the law, it is not bribery, to pay a private citizen to keep something quiet. Period. End of sentence. It happens every single day. There are NDAs where we sign. There are hush money agreements. Totally legal unless it's a public official, police officer, politician.
Exactly right. These are contractual arrangements. You are allowed to agree with someone for a sum of money not to speak about something embarrassing.
So this security guard at the Intercontinental, totally fine. Had that been a police officer working at the Intercontinental that day, that's bribery. That should go to prison for.
Will the defense show any videos or pictures, phone calls, texts as proof? Just curious. We got to hear it all right.
Yeah, that's they have that helps their case.
Exactly. Anything that they can sort of lay the foundation for. It's hard to get these pieces of evidence in sometimes because you have to show sort of the provenance of them, and there's various evidentiary rules. But yes, anything that they have that is hard evidence, they will try to admit as evidence and have someone up there to authenticate it.
Year 3, though, I think I'm pronouncing that right, says, what happened to duty to retreat? Cassie could have ran. There's no such duty. There's certainly, I think maybe we're conflating certain things.
Legal doctrines about sort of encountering someone.
Yeah, but a victim of sexual assault, which is what she asserts that she is and what the prosecutors say that they are, have no duty to retreat. You can certainly be the subject of sexual assault. You can be the victim of rape, even though you don't take every opportunity to get out of the situation.
That's exactly right. And Victor says, I want to hear Cassie's reason for not leaving day one. This is going to this is a
great point because
people are wondering.
This is what the jury's going to fixate on. Yes. Why didn't she leave?
Everyone wonders this about sort of battered women, people in domestic violence relationships. Why not just go to the cops? It's just not that easy. It sort of belies what is actually going on psychologically when you're in these sort of destructive relationships. It takes a toll on you. You feel trapped, even if that's a subjective feeling and you can actually walk across the street and tell a police officer. Many people don't feel that like that could.
We need to give credence to both sides on this, right? This is what the defense is going to say, that maybe Diddy even believes it, that she could have left at any time. She liked it. She wanted to be there. She enjoyed the privilege of being on the arm of this incredibly wealthy, powerful man.
And he'll also say, how was I supposed to know she didn't like it? She kept going along with it.
It was assumed that he would understand until that last video. But nevertheless, that's what he's going to argue. But we don't want to do too much of a disservice. We all have heard stories, or we know people who have been the subject of years of domestic abuse, battery at the hands of their husbands. We don't look them in the face and say, hey, why don't you go to the police sooner? We feel sympathy for them because there is a psychological dependence that especially women, but sometimes women can feel to their abuser. And it's awful, and we hope we get past it as a society, but we're clearly not there.
And we can't forget the power imbalance here. There's shades of, I keep thinking of Harvey Weinstein's cases. Many of those, he would go on dates with women who feigned attraction to him, and then they would still say that they were raped after the fact. And he was convicted of those types of offenses. He wasn't grabbing women in Central Park and holding them against a wall and raping them. He was promising them things. He was threatening to ruin their careers. It is a similar power dynamic when you have someone like Diddy and someone like Cassie, and that has to be acknowledged in some way. Certainly it's on the jurors' minds.
All right, guys, thanks very much again for tuning in. Send in your questions. We love answering them. I think they give a lot of color, things that you and I don't think about, questions that are in people's minds. We're happy to answer as many as we can. We are going to be live tomorrow again at around 2:30 p.m. Pacific time on YouTube. We do our best to hit that exact time. The trial ran very long today, so it pushed us back to get prepared for the podcast. But we're happy to, again, answer as many questions as you can. Thanks very much.
All right. See you next time.